Okay, so let's go way back in time. You know, when we think of history, most of us imagine Europe, castles, knights, kings, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution. That's what we were taught. But what if I told you that while Europe was still struggling through wars, disease, and poverty, there were empires in Africa that were richer, stronger, and in many ways more advanced? Yeah, real kingdoms, real cities, real stories. And yet, somehow, they barely show up in our history books. Why is that? Maybe because history is not just what happened, it's what people chose to write down. And for a long time, the world chose not to write Africa's story. So today, we're going to explore it together. And trust me, it's going to surprise you. This is the hidden history of the forgotten African empires. In the early 1300s, Europe was in chaos. Famine, wars, the looming Black Death. But far south in West Africa, the Mali Empire was shining brighter than any European kingdom. The land was overflowing with gold. Mali controlled the major trade routes across the Sahara, trading salt, ivory, and above all, gold. And at the center of it stood Mansa Musa, a man so wealthy that even today economists argue about how to measure his fortune. Some call him the richest person in all of history. His 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca was legendary. 60,000 people in his caravan, with thousands of camels carrying literal tons of gold. In Cairo, he handed out so much gold that the entire economy collapsed for over a decade. But Musa wasn't just rich. He built Timbuktu into a city of knowledge, full of scholars, manuscripts, and one of the first universities in the world. Europe at that time was burning witches and fighting endless wars, while Timbuktu scholars were writing about astronomy and medicine. Musa's empire showed the world that Africa was not poor. It was the beating heart of wealth and learning.
With the knowledge
Yet,
that has been passed down through generations.
Why isn't his name mentioned alongside Caesar or Alexander?
Why was his story left out?
Maybe because his story didn't fit the version of history Europe wanted the world to believe. The truth is, Musa's Mali wasn't an exception. It was part of a whole continent of powerhouses. Let's rewind even further. Everyone knows about Egypt's pharaohs, but very few know about the kingdom of Kush. Located just south of Egypt in modern Sudan, the Kushites built their own pyramids. More than Egypt ever did. For centuries they rivaled Egypt in trade and culture. And then, in the 8th century, BCE, something shocking happened. Kush conquered Egypt. Yes, you heard that right. African kings ruled as pharaohs of Egypt for nearly a century. They rebuilt temples, revived art, and defended the Nile from invaders. Yet, Hollywood movies never show them. Even today, dozens of Kushite pyramids still stand in Sudan. Mostly ignored by the world. Why ignore this? Because it proves that African power wasn't just local. It extended into the heart of one of the world's most famous civilizations. In southern Africa, between the 11th and 15th centuries, there rose a massive stone city, Great Zimbabwe. Built with walls stretching for miles, crafted without mortar, its ruins still baffle archaeologists. It was a trade hub, linking Africa with China, India, and Arabia. Chinese porcelain, Persian glass, and Arab coins have been found there. But when Europeans discovered the ruins in the 19th century, they refused to believe Africans had built it. They invented theories of lost tribes or even aliens. Anything but the truth, that Africans were skilled architects and engineers. Great Zimbabwe was proof of African ingenuity, and it threatened the colonial idea of Africa as primitive. So the truth was buried, just like the city itself. In modern Nigeria stood the Benin Empire, one of the most artistic civilizations in the world. The Benin bronzes, intricate sculptures, plaques, and castings were so detailed and advanced that when Europeans first saw them, they couldn't believe Africans made them. The city itself was laid out with massive earth walls, greater in length than the Great Wall of China. But in 1897, the British invaded, burned Benin City to the ground, and looted thousands of bronzes. Today, most of them sit in European museums, while Benin itself struggles with the memory of its stolen heritage. Imagine if the Louvre or the British Museum returned them. Would history finally look different? The Oyo Empire was a military powerhouse. With one of the strongest cavalry forces in West Africa, they dominated trade routes and neighboring kingdoms. But it wasn't just about war. Oyo had a complex political system, with checks and balances between the king and his council. Sound familiar? Almost like democracy before Europe claimed it. The empire thrived for centuries, yet in most school books it's reduced to a footnote. Another forgotten giant of history. If Mali impressed you, wait till you hear about Songhai.
Golden suns from the sand.
At its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries, Songhai was one of the largest empires in human history, larger than most European empires of the same time. Its capital, Gao, was a bustling trade city, while Timbuktu remained a center of scholarship. The empire had legal systems, organized armies, and wealth pouring in from trade. But when Morocco invaded with guns in the late 1500s, Songhai fell. Technology won over numbers. And once again, the memory of a superpower was erased. How many more stories like this were buried under colonial history? Long before Europe embraced Christianity, the Aksum Empire in Ethiopia had already done so. By the 4th century CE, Aksum was a Christian kingdom, trading with Rome, India, and even China. They built massive obelisks, minted their own coins, and some believe Aksum was home to the Ark of the Covenant. Think about that. A Christian African empire centuries before Europe converted. Why isn't this a bigger deal in world history? Along Africa's east coast, the Swahili city-states flourished. Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, these were wealthy, cosmopolitan cities. They traded with Arabia, India, and even China. Ships from the Ming dynasty once docked there, exchanging goods and culture. But when the Portuguese arrived in the 1500s, they attacked, burned, and destroyed many of these cities to control trade. The Swahili coast was written out of history, not because it was unimportant, but because it was too important. In Ghana, the Ashanti Kingdom held one of the most unique symbols of power, the golden stool. Made entirely of gold, it wasn't just a throne. It was believed to hold the soul of the nation itself. When the British demanded it in the 19th century, the Ashanti fought back in fierce wars. Thousands died, but the stool was never surrendered. Even today, it remains sacred, hidden from foreign eyes. Power that can't be stolen, no matter how hard empires try. So here's the big question. Why don't we learn about these empires in school? Why do their names rarely appear in history books? The answer is colonialism. European powers wrote Africa's history in a way that made it look poor, primitive, and dependent. The truth, that Africa was once full of wealth, knowledge, and innovation, was erased. But today, those ruins, manuscripts, and artifacts are still there, waiting. Maybe it's time we stop seeing Africa as the dark continent and start seeing it for what it really was. The beating heart of civilization, rich in stories the world tried to forget,